Yes, it's for the archives. Okay, so we're here in the Maori Meeting House at Field Museum, right next door to the Ground Zero 360 exhibit, and we are going to have a peace circle. And the reason the Raven Foundation is interested in this, I'm Suzanne Ross from Raven Foundation. We've started a new project called Honor Their Memory, Be a Hero for Peace, which is to take the occasion of the 10th anniversary of 9/11 to have conversations around peace building and nonviolent action, and to re-examine our response to the attack and to find maybe new and creative ways that we can begin to imagine responding from now on. So we're inviting people to form peace circles, and so what we'd like to do is demonstrate them and put them up on our website so people can see how easy they are to do and actually how rewarding they are and what a great place for conversations they are. So I think that's enough of an introduction. Linda Cooper is a circle keeper trainer and a circle keeper herself, and so she is going to introduce us to circles and get us started.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Well, welcome to this sacred space. This is a place where the Maori, the first peoples of New Zealand, traditionally congregated to learn about each other and to resolve conflict. So in this way, I believe the Maori people are our hosts today, although they're not here. And I believe this is a way to honor them and their tradition by doing this. We're holding a peace circle here today to reflect the greater understanding of peace that this space represents. However, the peace circle is a practice traditionally used by some of the first peoples. And so, like the Marae Encounter, the circle practice represents a sacred place where equals come together in a spirit of curiosity and to deeply listen. Now, I think Suzanne, you brought a talking piece?
Or brought the talking piece.
Or brought a
yes,
talking
I
piece?
thought she did.
Traditionally, in a peace circle, we use a talking piece to regulate the conversation. The person who is holding the talking piece can talk for as long as they want. They can pass the talking piece. They can hold it for a while and think. You can kind of choose what you want to do with it while you have it. And he will respectfully listen and pass it on. Traditionally, the talking piece goes from clockwise around the circle, so I move it to the person on my left. Often the talking piece has some meaning to the people in the circle. And Suzanne, would you like to talk about why you chose this?
Well, I was at my vacation home in Utah this summer and at an arts fair, and walking up and down the street, and I walked into one of the little shops that has stones in it of different shapes, and when I saw the heart-shaped stone, it just made me think it would be perfect as a talking piece because for me, the peace circle space it opens your heart. You speak from your heart, and you become open to other people. So it has a way. It's real and it's in it. it's grounding, I guess is what I want to say. So I just thought it was just beautiful and symbolic. I'm so happy we're using it.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you mentioned that in the circle, we encourage you to speak from your own experience and from the heart, as opposed to commenting on the behavior or experience of others. And this is a way to get to know each other authentically, and to really build. Today, we're reflecting on 9/11, and adjacent to this Marae Encounter space is the Field Museum's Ground Zero 360 exhibit. And so we're here to reflect on that exhibit. And so I would like to ask you all how 9/11 has affected you, either personally or in any way, and or what might be the new conversation regarding 9/11 that you're longing to have? What's the new conversation regarding 9/11 that you are longing to have?
We invited Sarah to use and she's never been used. Well, I've been reflecting on this for some time, personally, but because of work. But one of the things that strikes me about the photographs is, and also the posters of the missing people, representing them from the days after the war, is the faces. Stunned firefighters and the rescue workers, and the grief of people looking for their loved ones. And what I see now, of course, in 10 years since 9/11, is I've seen those kinds of looks on people's faces, but they're in Iraq, they're in Afghanistan. They're grieving, they're shocked. They don't know why this happened to them. And you see those faces. And I guess the conversation I would like to have is about the kinship we have because of our grief, because grief is a human emotion, right? The kinship we have with other people who are suffering, and what is our responsibility for that grief that we see in those countries. And really, the conversation I want to have is about not doing to others what was done to us, I guess, is not continuing the cycle of suffering, of creating widows and parents' children, and parents grieving for their children who died too young. I mean, I just don't, I'm tired of returning hate for hate, violence for violence, grief for grief. It's just, what I would like to talk about is how do we end it? Where is the creative response? Where's the leadership response from this country, that the United States, that's supposed to be a peaceful nation? Where are we leading on peace? I think it's out there. I think there are a lot of people doing peace work, but they don't make the headlines. And so I want them to be part of the conversation when we're discussing how do we respond to a dictator, someone harming citizens, yes, respond, but how? How to do it creatively, that's the conversation I'd like to have.
Can I say something first? Because I've been reflecting on this too for a while. I wrote something that may help initiate the conversation a little more. Bear with me. It's something I wrote a few days ago, and I like the fact that the heart is actually, a human heart is pretty heavy. But when you think about it in metaphysical or spiritual, heart is also very heavy and very small. But it's life-giving. And so you picked the right stone. But something I wrote said 9/11/01, 9/11/11. Can it be 10 years? Only 10 years. It seems much longer. So much has changed, yet so much the same. The lessons that day missed, not learned, and we go on, blinded by the light, not seeing what we need to see, eyes closed in slumber, unable to see the fires of wrath burning ever hotter against us. The bird of prey from the east coming up against us. Well, what will it take? Oh God, indeed, what must happen, God, for us to awaken from our slumber and arise from the darkness and come to the light, even the true light of heaven? Indeed, what must happen, God, to shake us awake, that our eyes be open when we arise from the darkness into the light and away from destruction? I remember 9/11. I remember coming to work that day. It was bright, sun shining. I think it was much. I think it'd been cool. Now it started warming back up. People were outside enjoying the day. It was so peaceful. And then shortly after I got to work, we started hearing reports. In fact, I was someplace doing something else. I needed the air conditioning, and he said, "Plane just crashed in the world." And then we heard the hour reports all day long. We just were shocked. And I remember, I started looking up, and there was no planes at all in the sky. And it stayed like that for days. And I thought, do we really know why we are targeted? What are we doing to change that? And nothing's changed. And I think that's where it starts. Getting to the heart of the matter, why we have become a target for people. And changing that. And I think there are peace warriors out there. Peace Corps workers. Youth for the mission workers. Mercy ship workers. Here and across the globe. Others. But it's a minority. But when these people go out there, they're working people to people, person to person, making friends, making peace. And it's a ripple effect. But something has to happen to change our culture because it's become so ingrained. Why is it Canada? It's like us.
Well, looking at the exhibit, the part that was the the most riveting, perhaps, was the posters of the missing people. And at first, it just looked like stuff on a telephone pole, particularly interesting, and then I just get pulled in by each person, and I had to go on to the next and read what little information they had, like has multiple tattoos and things like that, or they would list the person's weight, or she was wearing a black skirt. And that reminded me of the horror of the aftermath and all of the people looking for lost, loved ones. That there was no remains left, or very little. Or I remember reading about they would be scraping the DNA off of, steel girders and stuff like that, and that had a powerful effect on me, having lost my wife a few years before 9/11, and thinking, there's one thing to lose a loved one, there's another thing to lose all trace of a loved one. And so you don't even know for sure that this person is dead or they are dead. I recall shortly, within maybe a month or so after the 9/11, just seeing by accident an obit in the Chicago Sun-Times, and I think the headline was something like Lamb of God. And it was about a young woman that apparently had died at 9/11. They never found her, and they just essentially declared her dead and had a service for her, and they had a little, obit in the paper that talked about, things like she was on the debate team and whatever. Or she was an equestrian, I think that was one of the things. The details of a human life are so complex and seemingly meaningless until the person is dead. And then they just are sacred. And why do we keep looking at the images, or that the infrastructure, that's left, sticking in the ground, the mesh and all that? It's a sacred thing. And so that reawakened as I walked through the exhibit, that sense of this sacredness. And then I felt a wave of anger come over me that this is sacred, but not the other things, like our destruction that we've meted out 10 times or 100 times. The devastation of 9/11, and that just seemed very weird and puzzling to me. And well, not puzzling. It's not puzzling at all. It's so non-puzzling that that's why the anger started to, and it was just a go-nowhere anger. I've been angry about it for 10 years, that this is our response. It seems like it's a matter of seeing the sacred before they're dead, and it's sacred right now. It's not sacred only after you kill it. And I'm wondering, so the question was, what kind of conversation? I guess that's the conversation I want. How do we make it sacred now? And how do we walk in a sense of sacredness now with what, both with what we've lost and what's still present. But not just individual, but public. What is the public, you know, what is publicly sacred? And how do we, and what is the response to public, you know, to something that's sacred? And how do we stop killing it?
When I think about the conversation that I want to have, it's really very similar. It's the question of how do we actually go about creating peace. And as I was listening, it occurred to me that peace is, I think a lot of people think of peace as kind of the default setting, and it's what happens when there's, you know, everything is stagnant. But in reality, you have to work for it. It's, you know, it's, I don't really even know if there is a default setting, you know. It's conflict or peace, and both take a lot of effort and a lot of work. But the question is, I guess, I admit sometimes looking at all of these things, feeling a sense of hopelessness and wondering how do we really engage the people who have the power to cause so much harm. I was talking earlier with Linda about how it's often the quieter voices that are the ones that are advocating peace. So how do we really, sometimes it can feel so impossible to reach out and spread that peace. And it makes you wonder, you know, whether nonviolent movements have any power. But then you see things like, I saw a documentary just the other day about the women's peace movement in Liberia, which I had not known much about, but I learned that a group of women just decided that they were tired of war in their country, and they were the women in Liberia are the people with the least power, and they decided that they just weren't going to stand for it anymore, and it took a lot of work and a lot of time, but they told their leaders that they were tired of war and they wanted peace, and eventually, through a very long series of events, they got it, because they convinced the leader to go to a peace council, they got international attention, and it's just, that kind of thing gives me hope, knowing that there are ways, difficult ways, but ways of actually, at that level, that seemingly unattainable, impossible, untouchable level of doing that. So that definitely came to mind. And I am reminded about how fighting back is clearly not the response that brings peace. And I was reading some of the responses to the exhibit, and one of them really struck me about how we lost so many lives in the actual attacks, and then we sent more Americans to keep dying. And so it's, not only are we fighting back at some enemy that is really just too big to even attack, but we're hurting ourselves. And it just seems like the absolute wrong response. So I guess, yeah, the conversation I would love to have is how do we go about building peace, doing that work.
So in typical fashion, it was a typical morning, and I was getting ready to go to work, and at the last minute I decided to change my mind about what I was going to wear. And so I had to get the ironing board out. And so there I was, in a rush to get the ironing board out and to plug in the iron so I could iron the shirt that I wanted to wear. And the phone rang, and I thought, oh, rats, don't have time. So I answered the phone, it was our son. And he says, Mom, have you got the TV on? No, we never have the TV on in the morning. And he said, turn it on. I said, what channel? Any channel. I knew something was up. So I turned on the TV, and they were showing how this plane had gone in already. And it was, we were talking on the phone when I saw the second one go in. Oh, you know. And so it wasn't a typical morning anymore. Eventually I got to work. The reason why I had changed my mind about what I was going to wear is because I remembered that it was a county board meeting. I live in a rural county just north of Champaign. and I had a county board meeting that day. And so the meeting started at 9, and I didn't have to sit through the whole meeting. That would be a horrible thing to have to do. But I would get there sometime toward the beginning, and eventually they would get to my report, and I would give a report, and then I could leave. And just as I was going over there, someone said that one of the towers had fallen. And then while I was over there, still in the meeting, someone came into the meeting and whispered to someone, and they said the other tower had fallen. Now, does anybody else want to talk about this thing on the agenda? You know, and there was something that I really had to think about that. You know, and I still think about it, and I get angry when I think about it. But then I really don't know if we did the right thing that day or not. You know, I was just outraged that these people were sitting around the table doing this mundane kind of monthly board meeting. Give me your reports, all in favor, say aye, those opposed. Nobody ever opposes, and you go to the next thing. And part of me was outraged because there was something happening that was, you know, these lives, you know, this sacred stuff that you're talking about, you know, was going on, and we were, you know, on the other hand, I thought, it's important that we keep going on, and don't let this get to us, and we have to keep, you know, there's nothing we can do, we might as well just not let this get to us and just keep on and act like, you know, my dad used to say, look cool and calm on the top and paddle like heck underneath, you know. And to this day, I haven't got that reconciled in my mind yet. I really don't. I can't reconcile it. I don't know. It's just, but it was something. For the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to go to Eastern Mennonite University in Virginia, where they have a summer peace building institute. And I've taken classes there. And soon after 9/11, Church World Service went to Eastern Mennonite and asked them if they would create a curriculum that would work for trauma. And so they have a STAR curriculum. It's Strategic Trauma Awareness Resistance. And they've trained this week-long training all over the world to people to talk about when trauma happens, how to get out of that trauma without resorting to violence. And they have this little graphic that looks like a snail, and it shows how you get caught up in trauma and anger, and it just goes around and around, and you have to pull yourself out, you know, and get out of here. And how when you're really traumatized, it's okay to wallow, and it's okay to really want to strike back, because that's normal, you know, but then you have to work on that so that you don't do those things that are kind of, you know, maybe the first thing you want to think about. And so I think about that as being one of the wonderful outcomes, because they've done so much good around the world with that training, with that training. I think it's just excellent. But still, I think about, you know, those days and weeks right after 9/11 when we were really caught up in that cycle, what that had to be like. And we were talking before about, I think it was a Walgreens store nearby where people were dropping off their film and coming back and picking it up later. And there was a newspaper article about how excited these people that worked there got when people would come in and pick up their film. Because all they knew was the name on the film, and then one by one they noticed that nobody came up to pick up this one, nobody came back to pick up that one, you know. And that's how they discovered, you know, who was there and who wasn't. And you know, you think about just, there's so many stories like that that can keep you in that kind of cycle there that we get into sometimes. But last September, we had some people came from Norway to learn about how we're doing restorative justice in Illinois. And they were fascinating people. We learned so much from them, more than they learned from us. And so recently when that terrorist did all the killing, I just saw this the other day, and it's a quote I want to read to you. It says that it says government leaders could have focused on the threat and kept the country in a mood of fear. Instead, the Prime Minister adopted as his mantra what a young girl said after the tragedy. If one person can create so much hatred, think how much love we can all create together. And so that's the way Norway is handling this, crisis that they've had. And so that's the conversation that I want to have, is to think about how much love we could create if we all work together at it, if we all live together. So I don't think of it so much as like what the government is doing. I think of it as what we have to do, So on the way up here this morning, on the radio, they were talking about this Muslim temple that they're trying to build in Murfreesboro, and people were saying, how dare they do that right in the middle of the Bible Belt? They're doing it on purpose, It's, we've got to not allow that to happen. And so people in Tennessee are just, not everyone, but some people are so outraged by that, and I'm thinking, what if everyone judged me as a Christian by Jim Jones? Or, Timothy McVeigh, or some other Christian that, I don't agree with. And I hope no one does. So I think we have to have that conversation about if one group of people, a small group of people, can cause that much hate, what could we do together if we loved? Maybe if we as individuals could, it might even rub off on our senators and Republicans and Democrats, senators and representatives. What if that happened? That would be amazing. But that's the conversation.
Sally, you should know that, and you may know if you went to the website, that some of us got together and talked about where we were on 9/11. So, lest you think we're not addressing that, some of us did, which was very emotional for me. Hearing the collective voices of people in the group, I ended up ranting at the end when my time came to speak. You're talking about the Prime Minister of Norway, and I remember what he said too in that incident. The guy who killed the people was making a statement about immigrants coming to Norway, and I just thought it was so wonderful that Prime Minister said, we're going to honor our immigrants, and we're going to, make sure that our borders stay open for immigrants. He was just kind of really countering, kind of cutting off that, what you were talking about, when so often when we want to respond to violence with violence, he was cutting that off, as you were saying when you were talking about that snail. I hate this. I said a lot of my own hand. And listening to you made me think of the Oslo Peace Accords. I think it was 1993. The Oslo Peace Accords, for what we saw, the media made us believe that it was leaders who came together and created those Oslo Peace Accords. And in fact, it wasn't. It was lay people, leaders from the Israeli side and leaders from the Palestinian side, who got together. And they came up with the plan. And they were able to convince the the higher, they met at a lower level, and they were able to convince the people who were meeting formally at the higher diplomatic level to adopt what they had. So I mean, people, individuals who are not, government officials can make a difference. When I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War, and I was a teenager at the time, and just becoming a teenager, and I remember reading a Look magazine at the time, and I remember seeing the picture of a Buddhist monk setting himself on fire. That just changed everything for me. I thought, this guy is so upset and feels so strongly about something that he's dying for a cause. And this isn't the same thing because they hurt people, they kill people. But when the planes went into the World Trade Center, I thought, these guys died. These guys that were on the plane, who wanted this, they gave their life. What is going on with them? Why? So I was thinking, so that made me think of Buddhism. And granted, Buddhism, but it was that same feeling I had. This guy's why? And some of you know, heard my comments before, I wasn't always I kind of wondered why it hadn't happened earlier, frankly, because, we had inserted ourselves around the world in so many ways that had affected people's lives greatly. And so I wasn't surprised. It was horrible. And I was shocked. But of course I was surprised, but after thinking about it, I wasn't surprised. That thought that I had just isn't coming back. The new conversation I would like to have, it kind of dovetails what Suzanne was saying on her website about the United States Institute for Peace. We have the Pentagon, as Suzanne was saying on her website, the Reagan website, we have a Pentagon that is so funded. Politicians in the last several months have been arguing about how to lower the deficit. And they're trying to lower the deficit with, and correct me later on if I get this wrong, but with approximately 33% of the budget. I believe the war budget, the war budget, the defense budget, is about 77% of the entire U.S. budget. That's just, it's mind-boggling when you think of what we could do with that money. So, Suzanne posited this hypothetical. Wouldn't it be something if we put that kind of money toward the U.S. Institute for Peace instead of the war, Pentagon, and so on? And I thought, we've taught people to wear seatbelts. We've taught people to, I fought the seatbelts. I thought, come on, I've been driving for all these years and I know it's not gonna. Anyway, I argued about the seatbelts, but now I wear a seatbelt every day. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, boy, they mothers. We talk about women in
Yeah, it was just a couple of housewives out, I think East Coast or West Coast or someplace that, were fed up with all the kids because getting killed out there drinking and driving or killed by drunken drivers, and it changed everything.
Well, Mothers Against Drunk Driving have changed a lot in terms of drunk driving. And so I thought, maybe we could think about developing a curriculum of how to change the culture. And so I came up with some ideas, and we need a shift in logic, right? We need a paradigm shift. And so from the naive notion of win-lose to realization that a violent response is lose-lose. We all know this. So how about if we teach, this is my new conversation, how about if we teach delegitimize violence so that we create, we teach the costs of war, we teach the pain of war, the risk of war. We teach that. And in other words, war just isn't done. It's kind of like you don't go out without your seatbelt, you don't drink and drive. War just isn't done. And so you create a new norm. This is, I know, very pie in the sky hypothetical, but start somewhere. You create a new norm. You do that in part by telling the success stories. Telling Bob's story about the guy who forgave the guy in prison. This Indian guy was shot by a Muslim who was in Islamophobe, and the guy ended up trying to get out. That's a real extreme. So delegitimize violence. Teach the costs, teach the risks, teach the pain, tell the success stories. Change our language from war references, to peace references. Not the war on terror, but the search for understanding. Even when our sports references are all battle references. So many of our references. Currently we teach in school, we teach young people how to debate. We teach people how to talk, and we teach people how to win an argument. Why not teach listening and acknowledgement? People need to be heard. Teach intercultural communication. Arab communication styles are very different from Western communication styles, and that has often been one of the problems from what I've known between misunderstanding between Israelis and Palestinians. Israelis have a very Western communication style, and Arabs have a different communication style. And so it doesn't matter what they're talking about, at the get-go, they're offended because of their different communication style. Teach that conflict is normal and natural. Conflict is normal and natural. We in the United States, we like to deal with something and get it out of the way. And so we need to teach, just like in a relationship with your husband, with your wife, with your friends, that conflict is normal and natural, and actually conflict can help deepen a relationship, right? So we need to teach that that reconciliation is time-consuming, it's laborious, it's ongoing, it's conflictual, but that's natural and that's normal, and but there's a payoff at the end of that. We need to encourage the notion of apology and teach that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. So We need to teach what labeling means. We need to teach the psychology of labeling. I often wonder, why do we teach in school? And why do we wait till college to teach psychology? You know, I always thought, I wonder if kids would get into gangs if in 6th grade they were taught the psychology of mob behavior, why we're gangs. So teach labeling, the psychology of labeling, why we label other people. And then, along with that psychology, and this is around what you were talking about, when we get into a crisis, we often reach for things. We often reach for something to control that helps comfort us if we can grab onto something to kind of control the situation. And I would have liked us to, after 9/11, I would have liked us to look into in a holistic way, in a comprehensive, holistic, using the analysis. In other words, at this peace curriculum, teach people how to analyze, using a holistic, comprehensive framework, why something. 13 of the 19 people who attacked the World Trade Center were Saudi citizens. What was it? What were the psychosocial, historical factors going on with them, either with themselves or with the relationship with the West, that caused them to need that, to fight, to control, to ease their pain, to ease their crisis? We need to look at conflict more holistically and ask why. And I think what we currently do is, our response is the who and the what and the why. Is what weapon are we going to use? Drones, or are we going to use, special forces? And who were these people? The label on it, instead of the why. So we need to teach the why. I think I've been a peacemaker at heart for a long time. You know, I think we have I feel so deeply about when people are harmed by violence. And I think when I become emotional, I'm not succinct, because you're just feeling. And so I think my new conversation is, how can we teach peace using succinct language, and language that those who are skeptics will buy into, something that they will resonate with. I think there are a lot of people out there who are similarly inclined, but they resort to violence because they're caught up in a traditional response, and they're not, they can't think of another way. And I think that they need to be shown you. So be succinct, and be clear, and
On 9/11, I was in my first period grad class, and we were doing our homework in class. We were listening to 90s Latino Tribe, as we always did, doing our homework. usual. And then second period, I was in study hall in the cafeteria, and we had heard that another plane went into the tower, and they turned on the TVs in the cafeteria. It was really windy. And so we went on through the day, just sort of this like confusion and hearing from the people what had happened. And so then I went home for lunch, like fifth or sixth period, and it was like, wow, this is crazy. This stuff happening. And I went home, and my mom was home, and I went into the living room, and she was there, and she was just sobbing. She was like sobbing, totally looking at the TV. And it was like the first real like emotional response that I'd seen. And it was just, it was jarring more one because, you know, it's my mom like crying uncontrollably. But so this sort of same things that Sally was saying. So we were doing these mundane things throughout the day, but like this crazy thing happened, and nobody was really like responding to it emotionally. So then, you know, I went back to school, and it was like, you know, so intense at home and on, and I went back to school and back, you know, reading the books or whatever. So it was, when I think of that day, it was just like really confusing for me, and I think and a lot of people in our school, because like I remember in our social studies class, we didn't do the day's planned events, like we watched TV and pretty much talked about it, but other than that, it was just kind of like business as usual. And so it was just really weird. And then it was like finally, you know, when I got home, I watched the TV, so it was like, okay, I guess we can. When I think of 9/11, I also think about my friend who was a Marine, who died in Iraq in 2003. And he totally believed in the cause, he believed why he was there, he believed in everything. So that just, you know, convoluted things and, you know, added layers to my grief. And just really sad. And so I guess the conversation I want to have is just about the future, what the future is going to hold. What's the role of religion going to be in the future? How religion is going to affect like international relations, and just, you know, how are we all going to be able to coexist? And you know, I'd like, as you guys know, I'd like to see these more peaceful options being put on the table, and people bringing those options. They go with just the traditional response, but they might not know what it is, you know. So that needs to happen. I don't know how, but I hope it will.
You know,
Did you want to say?
We have to break the cycle between violence and that. We also have to understand we live in a world where there's both the embodiment of good and evil. You know, one hand, you know, and all, you know, there's a reality. There is a conflict between good and evil. It's a real thing. It's not an abstract thing. And we have to choose to condition ourselves, to raise our kids to pursue good, to do good, and be wise to do good, not do evil. And I think that's one of the keys. And I think, and also, I got to understand why there was so much anger afterwards. Because he was, you know, partly the media attack focused on this, but it left something in double their minds. At the same time, we saw trying to rescue people out of the towers, you know, and that, and rescue people out of the Pentagon, and that, and everything else. We saw people overseas dancing in the streets over what happened in New York City and Washington and that. And I think for a lot of people that said, this can't go unpunished. But instead of a restraint pursuit of the evildoers and those behind them, it became a law thing and a total vendetta. And so, in pursuing peace, establishing peace, you have to do it. Punish the wrong, but establish justice in the spirit of redemption. And but I can remember now, I think it was so shocking. You couldn't take, you couldn't, it was, you want to think, is this really real? Did it really happen until you saw the pictures? You had no point of reference. So, going to the meetings, going to work, being at work and that, in school, it was hard to evaluate, take it all in, and understand why we're doing this when this is just happened. And it's a profound effect on our country. It continues. And it wasn't just, and actually there's more victims than just the people in the towers. How many thousands contracted cancer from everything that came down in the air? All the asbestos and everything else. So, but that aside, we overreach in going after the evil ones. We should have never gone into Iraq. That was, I hate to say it, because I voted for a man. He should have listened to his father and never gone in there. We should have gone into Iraq. Afghanistan was to say the thing of making things right in that country after the damage we had created fighting the Russians in the 80s. We laid the groundwork for what we reached in 2001. And we still haven't learned the lesson. Nation in a peaceful manner.
Wrapping up.
I think we are wrapping up, unless anyone would like to add a comment or question. Yeah, I want to thank you all for participating. And indeed, the question is, how do you go about building peace and doing good in a peaceful way? And that's a challenge. And so, thank you for your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you for reading it.
Just a few days ago. But
Yeah.